I never thought my life would change in a matter of seconds, but that's exactly what happened the night I scratched off that lottery ticket. It wasn't even supposed to be anything big. I had stopped by a gas station after work, tired, half asleep, just wanting a soda and maybe a snack for the ride home. The cashier asked if I wanted to try my luck with a ticket, and for some reason I said yes. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was desperation. I scratched it off right there in the car, engine still running, and when the last number lined up, I froze. My chest felt like it collapsed in on itself, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. $1 million. I thought maybe I read it wrong. Maybe I was too tired to understand what I was looking at. But then I checked again, and reality started to sink in. I was holding something that could change my entire life. The first wave was pure adrenaline. I laughed out loud, almost hysterically, smacking the steering wheel like some drunk lunatic. The second wave was disbelief. I drove home gripping that ticket so tight my fingers went numb. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust anyone. I kept thinking someone was going to jump out of the dark and snatch it from me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I hid the ticket in 3 different places before finally sliding it under my mattress, as if that made any difference. The next few days were chaos inside my head. At work, people were still talking about bills and sports and their weekend plans, and I sat there like a ghost, nodding along, knowing that I wasn't one of them anymore. Not really. I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. My brain wouldn't stop spinning with what I could do with the money. Pay off my debts. Buy a house. Maybe even quit my job. I imagined myself walking into the office, throwing my badge on the desk, and never looking back. It was intoxicating. I wanted to tell my family, though. That's the kind of person I am, or at least I was. My parents had always struggled, working themselves sick just to keep the lights on. And my older brother, Derek, he had been the golden child once. But life didn't work out for him. He bounced from one failed job to another, got into trouble here and there, and lived off loans he never paid back. Still, he was my brother. I thought maybe this was my chance to change everything for both of us. So I told him first. His reaction was strange now that I think back on it. At the time, I didn't see it. I was too caught up in my own excitement. He congratulated me, hugged me, said all the right things, but his eyes were somewhere else, calculating, cold. He asked questions right away. How much exactly? When would I get the money? Was it cash or check? Could it be taxed? Could I invest it? He asked more questions than I had answers to, and I chalked it up to him being practical, but a part of me felt unsettled. I buried that feeling under the euphoria. When I finally claimed the prize, reality hit hard. Taxes ripped a chunk out of it, but it didn't matter. After everything, I was walking away with just over $600,000 in my account. More money than I had ever seen in my life. I stared at the numbers on the screen until my vision blurred. For the first time, I felt like maybe I had escaped the endless grind. Maybe I was free. But freedom is a funny thing. The moment you taste it, everyone else around you starts to notice too. Derek started hanging around more, calling me every day, dropping by unannounced. First, it felt nice. We hadn't been close in years, and I thought maybe this money was bringing us back together. But then the conversations shifted. He wanted to talk about joint investments, real estate, business ventures. He kept saying we could grow the money, double it, triple it. I wasn't interested. I didn't want risks. I just wanted security. That answer never sat well with him. I ignored the tension. I told myself he was just excited, that maybe he wanted to feel included. I convinced myself it was harmless. But the truth is, something had already started to rot between us. Looking back, the seed was planted the moment I told him. $1 million doesn't just change your life, it changes how people look at you. And Derek, my own brother, was already looking at me like I was a target. The weeks after the money hit my account were a blur. I thought the hardest part was over, that the shock of becoming rich overnight would eventually settle down into something stable. I was wrong. The shock faded, but it left behind this gnawing paranoia. Every time I opened my banking app, I felt like I was staring into a fragile bubble that could burst any second. I was terrified of making the wrong move, of wasting it, of losing it. And then there was Derek, always in my ear, turning that paranoia into something heavier. At first, his suggestions seemed harmless. He'd bring me brochures about local properties, startup pitches he found online, even schemes about flipping cars. He'd talk for hours, trying to sell me on his vision of how we could become real players. I'd sit there, nodding, but deep down all I wanted was peace. I wanted to pay off my debts, get a decent house, maybe finally afford a vacation. Nothing grand, nothing insane. But to him, my caution was weakness. He'd say things like, "You don't understand how money works," or, "If you're not multiplying it, you're losing it." First it was annoying. Then it became suffocating. I tried to set boundaries. I told him I wasn't interested in risky investments. I told him I needed space to figure things out. That only made him more persistent. He started showing up uninvited, walking into my apartment like it was his. He'd open my fridge, grab a beer, and sit down like he owned the place. The visits weren't about spending time together. They were about reminding me that he was always there, always watching. The more I pulled away, the more he pushed in. One night, he cornered me about a real estate deal. He said he'd already spoken to some people, that all we needed was my signature and my money. When I said no, he laughed. But it wasn't a normal laugh. It was sharp, bitter, like he was offended. He told me I was being selfish, that family sticks together, that he had plans and I was holding us both back. I remember sitting there, gripping the edge of the couch cushion, feeling like the walls were closing in. That was the first time I thought maybe I'd made a mistake telling him. Maybe I should have kept it to myself. But guilt is a powerful thing, and I kept convincing myself I owed him something. We grew up in the same broken house, eating the same cheap food, wearing the same hand-me-downs. If I finally had a way out, shouldn't he get one too? That's what I told myself, even as my gut screamed that something was off. Things started to unravel when he asked to borrow money. Not a small amount either. He wanted 50 grand. He said it was temporary, that he'd pay me back in a month, that it was just to get something started. My chest tightened the moment the words left his mouth. I knew I'd never see that money again if I gave it to him. I told him I couldn't, not yet, that I had other plans. His face went dark, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that scared me. It wasn't disappointment. It was hate. From that moment, the air between us shifted. He stopped pretending to be supportive. The calls became colder, the visits more hostile. He'd make little comments, underhanded jabs about me being greedy, about me turning my back on blood. He made me feel like the villain, like somehow the money wasn't mine alone, but something we both owned. I remember one night vividly. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I realized I had started locking the door when I knew he was coming over. He was my brother, and I didn't trust him to walk into my home without fear. That realization sat in my stomach like a stone. Then came the paranoia. I'd noticed things out of place in my apartment. A drawer slightly open when I hadn't touched it. A window latch unlocked. Small things, but enough to make me wonder if Derek had been snooping when I wasn't around. I started checking my bank statements obsessively, convinced he'd find a way to get in. I even considered hiring a lawyer to set up protections, but I kept putting it off, telling myself I was just overreacting. Looking back, I wasn't overreacting at all. Derek had already decided what he was going to do. I was too blind, too guilty, too desperate to believe the best about him to see the truth. My brother wasn't just circling me, he was plotting. And by the time I realized how far he was willing to go, it was already too late. I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there, scattered in plain sight, but I was too wrapped up in my own fear of losing everything to connect the dots. Derek didn't argue with me after I refused to lend him the money. He didn't yell or slam the door. Instead, he got quieter, calculated. It was like he flipped a switch and decided to play a longer game. That was the scariest part. When someone close to you stops showing you their anger, that's when you know they're already working on something behind your back. The first incident felt like an accident. I came home from running errands and found a small bag tucked into the corner of my couch cushions. At first, I thought it was trash, something I must have picked up without noticing. But when I pulled it out, my stomach dropped. It was a little bag of pills. I panicked, flushing them immediately, convincing myself someone must have dropped them or maybe they'd been there from before I moved in. But the thought wouldn't leave me. It was too deliberate, too neatly tucked away. Then came the smell. One night, a cop knocked on my door after a neighbor complained about strange odors. I laughed it off, showed them around, let them see nothing was happening. But as soon as they left, I noticed a plastic bag hidden under the sink that definitely hadn't been there before. Powder, sealed tight, like something out of a crime show. My skin went cold. I didn't touch it. I grabbed gloves, wrapped it in layers of plastic, and dumped it in a dumpster 3 blocks away. I remember walking back in the freezing night air, hands shaking, head pounding, thinking, what the hell is going on? The paranoia grew into obsession. I checked every drawer, every corner, every pocket of my clothes before leaving the apartment. I stopped inviting people over. I even bought a lockbox for my valuables, though I knew that wasn't what I really needed to protect. What I didn't realize then was that Derek wasn't just planting drugs randomly, he was building a case. A picture of me that he could hand to the world when the time was right. The breaking point came on a Friday night. I had just gotten back from grabbing takeout when the red and blue lights flashed outside my building. My chest locked up. For a second, I thought maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe something was happening next door. But then the knock came. Heavy. Final. By the time I opened the door, half a dozen cops were already inside, pushing past me. They went straight for the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. I stood there frozen, food bags still in my hand, as they pulled out packages I had never seen before from places I swore I hadn't touched. Under the bed, in the closet, even in the trunk of my car. It was surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. My throat closed, my mind raced. All I could think about was Derek. The way he'd been around so often, the way he'd gotten access to my place, the little smirk he wore when I told him no. And then the worst thought hit me. How easy it would be for him to tell the cops he'd always suspected I was into something. They cuffed me on the spot. The humiliation burned hotter than the fear. Neighbors peered out from behind doors, watching as I was dragged down the hallway like some junky criminal. Every step felt like the floor was crumbling beneath me. The world I thought I'd built, the money, the freedom, the dreams, collapsed in a matter of minutes. At the station, they read me the charges. Possession with intent to distribute. Felony. The words echoed in my skull like gunshots. I sat there, numb, knowing exactly how the drugs got there but having no way to prove it. And the sickest part? I knew who was behind it, but if I said his name, it would sound like the desperate rambling of a guilty man. My brother set me up. Doesn't carry much weight when they just pulled a kilo from your closet. That night in the holding cell, staring at the dirty wall, I replayed every moment over and over, trying to find where I'd gone wrong. Was it when I told him about the money? When I refused his loan? When I trusted him to come over even after I felt the shift in his eyes? My chest hurt with every thought, because deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't just been careless. I had handed him the knife and turned my back, and now he was driving it straight through me. And the $1 million, the dream that was supposed to save me, was about to become his. The first night in jail was the longest of my life. The cell reeked of sweat and disinfectant. The walls scribbled with the ghosts of people who had passed through before me. I lay on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, trying to process how fast my life had flipped upside down. Just days earlier, I was a guy with $1 million win, fantasizing about houses and vacations. Now I was an inmate, branded a criminal before I even had a chance to speak. Sleep didn't come. Every sound, a cough, a laugh, the clang of a metal door, made my chest tighten. I couldn't stop thinking about Derek. His face haunted me, that cold look in his eyes when I turned him down. I knew he had done this, but knowing and proving are two very different things. When I met the public defender assigned to me, reality sank even deeper. He skimmed through the paperwork, sighed like he'd seen this story 100 times, and told me straight. The evidence looked bad. Drugs found in multiple places, packaging that suggested intent to sell, Anonymous tips pointing fingers at me. I almost laughed when he said that part. Anonymous tips. I didn't need a crystal ball to guess whose voice had been on the other end of that phone call. Still, the lawyer didn't look convinced when I said my brother set me up. Family drama doesn't carry much weight in a courtroom. The arraignment came fast. Standing in front of the judge, hearing the charges read aloud, I felt like I was watching someone else's life unravel. My hands shook as I pleaded not guilty. The prosecutor smirked, confident, as if the outcome was already decided. They had boxes of evidence, photographs, reports. All I had was my word and a brother who was probably sitting at home, feet up, enjoying the show. Jail became my new reality. Days blurred into each other. The noise, the tension, the constant feeling of being watched. It broke something inside me. I stopped eating much, stopped talking to anyone. I spent hours replaying my past, wondering if there had been a way to stop this before it started. Maybe if I'd just given Derek the money, even knowing he'd waste it. Maybe if I'd never bought that ticket in the first place. Winning felt like a curse now, a trap disguised as a blessing. Court dates crawled forward, each one dragging me deeper into despair. The prosecution painted me as a dealer living a double life, a man who suddenly came into money and thought he could expand into drugs. They twisted my win into a motive. The jury listened, nodding, eyes narrowing at me. I could feel their judgment pressing down, smothering me. My lawyer did what he could, poking holes, asking questions, but without proof of Derek's hand in all this, I looked guilty. I looked exactly like the man they wanted me to be. The worst moment came when they brought up the money. My bank accounts were frozen pending the investigation, but Derek's name slipped into the conversation through financial records. He had been moving money, shifting funds I had let him hold temporarily. I remembered it too clearly, one of the few times I gave in, letting him manage a small sum, thinking it would calm him down. Now it looked like a connection, like I was laundering money through him. My stomach turned to stone as the jury scribbled notes. Nights in the cell grew darker. I felt myself unraveling, muttering to the walls, clenching my fists until my knuckles split. The anger at Derek was so raw I could taste it, but mixed with it was shame, because I had let him get this close. I had trusted him when every instinct screamed not to. That guilt was heavier than the charges. But in the middle of that darkness, something sparked. Maybe it was survival, maybe it was stubbornness, but I decided I wasn't going down without a fight. If Derek wanted to destroy me, he was going to have to do more than plant a few bags of powder. I started writing everything down. Dates, visits, strange things I noticed, details I had ignored. I filed grievances about the drugs found, demanded lab reports, chain of custody records, anything that might show a crack in their story. My lawyer thought I was wasting energy, but I couldn't stop. If I didn't claw for every scrap, I'd drown. The trial loomed like a storm. I could feel it building, pressing down on me with every passing day. I knew the odds were stacked against me. The state had evidence, resources, a polished narrative. I had desperation and a truth nobody believed. But sometimes, desperation is enough to keep you alive, to keep you fighting. As I sat in that cold cell, waiting for the next hearing, one thought anchored me. Derek wasn't just trying to steal my money. He was trying to erase me, to make me disappear so he could take everything without resistance. And if I was going to fall, I was damn sure going to drag his name into the light before I hit the ground. The trial dragged on like a slow bleed. Every day felt like another piece of me was stripped away in front of strangers who would eventually decide whether I had a life left to return to. The prosecutor was relentless, stacking the narrative higher, making me out to be some reckless fool who thought money and drugs could buy him power. I sat there, jaw clenched, listening to lies wrapped in just enough facts to sound convincing. And all the while, Derek stayed quiet, nowhere to be seen. He didn't visit, didn't call, didn't even pretend to care. That silence was louder than anything the prosecutor said. But silence has a way of making people curious. One of the breaks came from the most unexpected place. A detective took the stand to describe how the drugs had been found. Chain of custody, search procedures, all the usual technical jargon. My lawyer pressed him on the anonymous tip that had led them to me. The detective hesitated, just slightly, before saying he couldn't disclose details of the caller. It was supposed to be routine, but that hesitation stuck with me. I'd seen hesitation before, usually when someone was covering for a hole in their story. I pushed my lawyer to dig deeper. At first, he brushed me off, saying anonymous tips were common, protected, hard to trace. But when I wouldn't let it go, he finally filed a motion to review communications related to the tip. Most of it came back redacted, but there was a detail they couldn't scrub. The call had come from a prepaid phone bought at a gas station near Derek's apartment. My pulse hammered when I read that line. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was the first thread, and I wasn't about to let go. Then there were the fingerprints. At trial, the prosecution presented plastic bags and packaging, all supposedly pulled from my apartment. They claimed my prints were on some of them. But when the lab report finally came through in full, I saw something odd. A second set of prints had been found on the tape sealing one of the bags. Unidentified. Not mine. My lawyer barely mentioned it in court. Said it was inconclusive. But in my head, alarms were blaring. I knew those prints were Derek's. I could see him in my mind, crouched in my kitchen, sealing up evidence, smug in the belief I'd never noticed the details. I started piecing together the timeline. The nights he dropped by unannounced. The times I noticed things out of place. The bag under the sink. The smell that brought the cops to my door. It wasn't random. It was methodical. Derek had been planting the seeds for weeks, maybe months, building a story that would unravel perfectly when the cops arrived. He wasn't sloppy, but he wasn't perfect either. And perfection is the hardest mask to wear for long. Outside the courtroom, I heard whispers. A friend of a friend told me Derek had been bragging about big money moves, showing off a new car, dropping cash at bars like he owned the world. The timeline stung. He had started flashing wealth right after my arrest, right when my accounts were frozen. I wanted to scream it from the rooftops. That's my money. He stole it. But screaming doesn't win trials. Evidence does. The more I thought about it, the clearer his motive became. Derek didn't just want the money. He wanted me out of the way, discredited, erased, so nobody would question where his sudden fortune came from. If I was rotting in prison, he could play the successful brother, the one who made it. I was the scapegoat and he was the beneficiary. Still, suspicion and half-truths weren't enough. I needed something solid, something undeniable. The chance came in the form of a slip-up. One afternoon, during a recess, my lawyer came to me with a look I hadn't seen before. Interest, maybe even hope. A financial investigator had flagged suspicious activity on one of Derek's accounts. Large deposits made in cash, followed by withdrawals that lined up perfectly with the weeks leading to my arrest. Cash he couldn't explain. Cash that matched the street value of the drugs they said were mine. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of fire in my chest. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a weapon. Proof that Derek wasn't just a bystander, that he had skin in this game. If we could tie the money to him, if we could match the fingerprints, maybe the jury would start to see me not as a liar, but as a victim. But hope is dangerous. In jail, hope feels like a rope. Sometimes it pulls you out, other times it tightens around your neck. I clung to it anyway because the alternative was giving up, letting Derek walk away with everything while I rotted. And if there's one thing I promised myself in those dark nights staring at the ceiling, it was this. If I was going down, I'd make sure the world knew who dragged me there. The trial turned into a battlefield. Every day felt like a war of attrition, me bleeding out piece by piece while Derek sat somewhere out there, free, spending my money. But for the first time since my arrest, I had a weapon in my hands, the fingerprints, the financial trail, the anonymous tip tied to his neighborhood. Small cracks, yes, but cracks all the same. And cracks spread when you hit them hard enough. My lawyer was hesitant. He warned me that dragging my brother into this would look desperate, like I was inventing scapegoats. But I didn't care anymore. What was left to lose? They had painted me as a criminal, stripped me of my dignity, locked me in a cage. If I didn't point the finger at Derek, I'd be another cautionary tale, another body swallowed by the system. I told my lawyer flat out, I'd rather look desperate than sit silent while Derek stole the rest of my life. So we went at him. In court, my lawyer cross-examined the detective again, hammering on the call that had led them to my door. He asked about the prepaid phone, the gas station near Derek's place. The prosecution objected, the judge sustained, but the seed was planted. The jury heard it. They shifted in their seats. Doubt, once whispered, can grow louder than any argument. Next came the fingerprints. The prosecution wanted to gloss over the unidentified set. We forced it back into the spotlight. My lawyer reminded the jury that evidence is supposed to be airtight. If someone else's prints were on the drugs, who was that someone? Why wasn't the state interested in finding out? Again, objections flew, tempers rose, but the point landed. Holes in the story. Holes Derek hadn't expected. The financial investigator's testimony was the heaviest blow. He detailed Derek's sudden influx of cash, the withdrawals, the unexplained purchases. He spoke carefully, not outright accusing him, but the implication was clear. Money doesn't appear out of nowhere, and it doesn't disappear in neat little chunks that line up with drug buys unless something shady is happening. I watched the jury scribble furiously, the prosecutor shifting uncomfortably in his chair. For once, I felt like I wasn't the only one screaming about Derek's shadow. But the fight took its toll. The prosecution doubled down, painting me as manipulative, claiming I was dragging my family into this to save myself. They paraded witnesses, neighbors who thought I acted strange, coworkers who admitted I'd been distracted since the lottery win. They turned my paranoia into evidence, my silence into guilt. And through it all, Derek stayed invisible, just out of reach, like a ghost pulling strings. Nights in my cell grew heavier. Even with the small wins, freedom felt distant. I'd close my eyes and see Derek driving a new car, drinking top-shelf liquor, laughing about how stupid I was. The anger was poison, burning me from the inside. Some nights I wanted to quit, to let it all crash down. But every time that thought came, I pictured his smirk, and the fire roared back. As the trial neared its end, the weight of choice crushed me. My lawyer whispered about a plea deal. Lesser charges, reduced time. It was tempting in a sick way. A guaranteed end, even if it meant years behind bars. But taking it would mean admitting guilt, letting Derek win completely. I couldn't stomach that. I told him no. I'd rather gamble on the jury. The closing arguments felt like the final heartbeat before flatline. The prosecutor painted me as reckless, selfish, blinded by money. My lawyer painted me as betrayed, framed by blood. Two stories, both dramatic, both believable in their own ways. As I sat there, staring at the jury, I couldn't read their faces. Some looked angry, others thoughtful. All I could think was how my entire life now rested in the hands of 12 strangers who didn't know me, who only knew the version of me Derek had helped create. When the judge dismissed us for the day, I shuffled back to my cell, chains rattling. The tension in the courtroom still clung to my skin like sweat. Tomorrow they'd deliberate. Tomorrow they'd decide if I walked free or if Derek succeeded in burying me for good. I lay on my bunk that night, eyes wide open, chest tight, and made myself a promise. If the jury gave me even a sliver of freedom, I wouldn't waste it. I'd expose Derek, burn his empire of lies to the ground, and make sure the world knew the truth. Because if I didn't, I'd never be free. Not in prison, not outside, not ever. The day of the verdict felt like stepping into my own execution. My chest was a drum, each beat louder than the last as I was led into the courtroom in chains. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable blank masks that hid the weight of the decision they carried. I tried to study them, searching for any sign of mercy, but there was nothing. Just silence, heavy enough to crush the air out of my lungs. The foreman stood, paper in hand. My whole life balanced on that single sheet. When he spoke, the words came out in slow motion. On the charge of possession with intent to distribute, not guilty. My knees almost buckled. A second charge, smaller but still damning, not guilty. Then one more, lesser but lingering, guilty. My head snapped up. The world blurred for a moment. They hadn't cleared me completely. The weight of the system still pressed down. But it wasn't life in prison. It was time served, probation, a record I'd never escape. A technical survival. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The prosecutor scowled. My lawyer put a hand on my shoulder. Whispering congratulations like this was some kind of victory. It didn't feel like one. I walked out of that courthouse technically free, but I carried chains no one could see. My reputation was shredded. My money gone. My life cracked beyond repair. And Derek? He was nowhere to be found. In the weeks that followed, I pieced together scraps of news. Derek had vanished. The flashy car was gone. The apartment emptied. He'd taken what he could and disappeared. Slipping through cracks the justice system never bothered to look at. To the world, he was just another guy who got lucky, who moved on. To me, he was the ghost of every nightmare I'd lived through. I tried to rebuild. I found a small apartment, got a job that barely covered rent. People whispered behind my back. Co-workers kept their distance. Once you're labeled, even if you beat most of the charges, the stain never fully washes off. I learned that fast. The lottery win, the dream of freedom, it all felt like a sick joke now. I had more sleepless nights than peaceful ones. Every shadow looked like Derek. Every phone call made me flinch. But I also learned something else. Survival changes you. I didn't break in that cell, and I didn't break in that courtroom. Derek tried to erase me, and he failed. He stole my money, he stole my peace, but he didn't take everything. I'm still here. My voice is still mine. And if he ever shows his face again, I'll be ready. Do I wish I'd never bought that ticket? Sometimes. Other times, I think the ticket just showed me the truth about the people around me. Money doesn't change who you are, it just strips away the mask. Derek was always this person. I was just too blind to see it until it was too late. Now, when I walk past a gas station, I don't look at the lottery counter. I don't dream about jackpots or freedom. I dream about something smaller, quieter. Peace, safety. A life where I don't have to look over my shoulder. Maybe that's the real lottery. Maybe that's the prize I'm still chasing. And if you're listening to this story, take it as a warning. Be careful who you trust, especially when life suddenly hands you everything you ever thought you wanted. Sometimes the person standing next to you isn't clapping for your victory. They're sharpening the knife. That's my story. If it made you think, if it kept you hooked until the end, do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe. Because I've got more to tell, and trust me, the truth is always stranger than fiction.